A lot of the times, the hardest part of a relationship that has been marred with addiction and dysfunction is when one of the people with a problem actually tries to recover. This is just materialized with famous comedian John Mulaney and his now soon-to-be former wife.
I'm JT. I'm in my mid-30s, have a 10-year media career, and nearly a decade of sobriety. So how did another middle-class kid turn into a blackout drunk and a heroin junkie? More importantly, how did it change, and where do we go from here? This is my story.
So I promise I did not want this show to be the celebrity rehab gossip blog. That is not what I intended. It just so happens that several celebrities have been in the news lately for things relating to addiction and recovery. And when that happens, I don't want to gossip about the material at all, but what I do like to do is use that as a point of reflection from my own lived experience, because it just so happens that more people gravitate towards that material because they're interested in it. And if that way I can respectfully find a way to get this message to more people, then I'm going to try to do that. But this one is really interesting to me, and I don't know that many people have any understanding, truthfully, about this part of the experience. So John Mulaney, the comedian, has been in the news a bunch lately. It started because he relapsed. He had, as far as I knew, been sober for a long time. I guess he had been struggling a little bit more than he had publicly let on. He went into rehab for cocaine and alcohol. That's all been in the news. Recently came out of rehabilitation, and almost just as soon as the news had come out about his relapse and he had come out of rehab, his wife then announces that the couple are divorcing. Now, I found it a little bit strange that the wife was the one to go to the news. In fact, we have her statement. Her name is Anna Marie Tendler. I suppose Tendler's her maiden name. Anna Marie announced on Monday that he is divorcing her. She says, "I am heartbroken that John has decided to end our marriage. I wish him support and success as he continues his recovery." Now, the reason I say that's odd is because it doesn't sound like this was her idea. There's no way we could ever know. But my experience, at least anecdotally, is that when there's celebrity breakups like this, it's usually not the person that's getting dumped that's going to the public and admitting that they're heartbroken. I really admire Anna Marie's vulnerability to be honest about how she's feeling. I mean, let's be honest. Usually it's a publicist that announces, or an agent that announces breakups like this. Now, she is not famous for other things as far as I know. So that makes it even weirder. And maybe that's why you wouldn't have a publicist broker the divorce to the public, but this really got me thinking, and I'll just go ahead and say it, and I don't even really know if I have any comment on this, but this has been even further complicated because just days after she made this announcement that they're getting divorced, now the rumor is, which I believe was quote-unquote confirmed by People magazine, is that John Mulaney is now dating Olivia Munn. So, you know, you have to at least, whether it's truth, if that's neither here nor there as it pertains to the sobriety, addiction, recovery question, or really even if it has nothing to do with their divorce, hard to say that it doesn't, just looking at it on its face. But I think it actually, bears some thought to consider that part of it as well. So let's just start with the split. So this is incredibly complicated, but I can tell you from my experience that when I was going through outpatient rehab, when I was early in sobriety, I was going through the program with many people, and I have subsequently seen many people go through the program since that were in marriages or serious relationships where a split happened after sobriety had already been attained. So it's really fascinating because you think about it, and usually sometimes there's addiction on both sides. I will say most of the time there is work for both people to do, whether the other person is an addict or not. Usually there's some other underlying issue, whether it be codependency, depression, a whole array of things. Even if that person just becomes an Al-Anon, there is usually work to be done on both sides. And so what's really interesting about it is like you have this other person in the relationship, right? And usually that person has gone through a very trying time being married or in a relationship with this other person who has a raging addiction. You can just imagine all the different things that come up, all the dark and really sad and unfortunate things that go on for that person. And then when they go into recovery, most of the time, from my experience, I've seen these people be incredibly supportive and do everything they can to be with it, be present, be involved. I mean, usually rehab is a family thing. Me, for example, my mom was with me like every step of the way. She was in the groups when it was parent time. They had a separate group at my rehab. So we had our group, and then family had, so where all the families were together so they could work through their stuff. So, usually the person in the relationship with the addict has, number one, had to bear, a bunch of really unfortunate stuff through the act of addiction, then has voluntarily, supportively gone through the process with the addict. And then for many reasons, a split will happen or can happen thereafter recovery. And I'll say, I don't think there's any statistics, and I can't even tell you anecdotally if it's usually the addict or the non-addict who wants the split or sets out first for the divorce or split. But I think you just have to consider, because the question comes up, right? Like, okay, we just went through all of that stuff, and now ostensibly it's getting better. We're closer to the light, and then the split happens. So just to the untrained eye, it's odd, but I think the biggest point in all this is that when a person goes through recovery successfully, and let's just say that's, the first 6 months to a year, so much change happens to that person in a very short period of time. Some of it noticeable to the person and those around them. I would say a lot of it noticeable to those around them in a positive way. But some of it even unnoticeable to the person themselves, because if you're having a successful recovery, you are leaving behind the dead skin of a person who you no longer are. And I'll tell you, for me, it took years before I recognized all the little things that I had left behind. At first, some of them I wasn't even conscious of, those parts of my personality or my behavior, and then became awake to them. And some of them I really worked on. Some of them I'm still working on today, but a lot of them just go by the wayside with progress and improvement. And it's not always the bad stuff that goes. Sometimes it's something with the person that the other person really liked, It can happen in so many different multitudes of ways, but I think that's the biggest takeaway, is that someone that is having a successful recovery has changed into a different human being. And we hear about divorce. Many of you may have experienced it yourself. I know I've experienced it in a long-term relationship. People change. And sometimes when people change, it leads to irreconcilable differences. That can lead, it's almost even not even worth pinpointing every little change in emotion that happens, because there are so many. But once you understand that, you could understand why two people, when you think they've already been through the hardest parts, just can't seem to be together anymore after, you would think it's getting towards the good part. And that's because the change, the metamorphosis is so profound and visceral that it just bears to come into existence that those two people may not be compatible anymore. Now, as this pertains to this specific situation, I don't really know, right? We don't have those details. It does not sound like John Mulaney's wife wanted this. And now it's further complicated because it appears that, all of this stuff could be true that I was just talking about. They could have, maybe he went through this change and she bore the brunt of the relationship, and then they could no longer live together after he came through rehab. But I will say, on the surface, it does look like he actually just traded in for a different model, and that's sad. I am most certainly minimizing it, but let's be honest, Olivia Munn is known most for being beautiful and being sexy. So it's this one is super complicated, but I really feel for people in relationships. I was very lucky that I was not in a serious relationship when I got sober, because so I changed so much. That also means that since I wasn't in a serious relationship, I didn't leave a bunch more damage towards another person. I had already damaged enough people close to me. So there's many reasons that I'm thankful for it. Another reason is, and I've talked about this before, it is not recommended to get into a serious relationship early in sobriety. It is also recommended not to make major changes early in sobriety. Now, you can see in the case for Blady here, if the reports are true, he is ending a relationship and he is getting into a new one. So those are two major changes. I'll also point out that he's already back to work as well. Now, granted, people got to make a living, but his living is very much in the limelight, and it is the job of a comedian, though I've never been one, is to process your own emotions and feelings and filter them into your act along with your observations of the world, and that there is some level of vulnerability and truthfulness going out to the world when you do that act. So I know for me, I would maybe try not to do all those things early in sobriety. And I'm not perfect. I didn't do everything that I was supposed to do early on, but I'll tell you, I did not get into a relationship. They say, try to avoid it for a year. I stayed away from it for like a year and a half, maybe 2 years, I think. And I've said before, looking back, the relationship that I got into 2 years sober, I was still not ready for. And the reason that the professionals advise against that stuff is because, again, you've gone through all this change, you are making this positive progress on your life, and these changing dynamics that are, there's so many ways they can trigger the addict brain, the addict heart, the addict emotion. There's so much that can go wrong. And most importantly, the professionals know that metamorphosis is happening and is going to continue to happen and evolve for several years in early sobriety. So that's why they recommend staying away from it. I did want to point out a little bit of research talking about divorce and splits early on in sobriety. There's not too much hard data on how many people stay together or divorce after getting sober. You can see how that's kind of a sliding scale. It's hard to pinpoint those things. But what do we know? We do know that divorce is more likely when there's an addict in the relationship. We know that divorce makes it more likely for a child to become an addict. And I thought this was very interesting. This is a quote from a divorce attorney named Nancy R. Van Tyne from Massachusetts. And she says, "I've also noticed that occasionally, but not rarely, the divorce occurs after the addicted partner has become sober. I have theorized," and I'll point out again, this is a theory. There's not a ton of hard data. This is her theory, my lived experience, anecdotal, so take that for what it is. Remember, I'm not a doctor or professional. "I have theorized that the new sobriety has shifted the control issues in the marriage, and one or the other is unwilling to continue in the new paradigm. That's something I didn't really mention, but I think worth consideration. 2, this is often the source of a great deal of difficulties in divorces, as the non-addicted spouse probably dealt with their partner's addiction for some time and reached a point of irreparable damage. We talked about this. While those who recover from addiction feel slighted and betrayed that their spouse would leave them once they were sober. I think those things are worthy. I think definitely clear that they're coming from a divorce attorney. But I think worth considering that wasn't exactly the lens that I viewed it through, but those are other things that absolutely do come up. I mean, look, resentment is a huge part of addiction, and it is a huge part of sobriety, right? Working through those resentments, working to not live with resentment as a sober person. And though she didn't use the word resentment, is something she's clearly talking about there. So look, I don't have any profound thing to say. Again, I don't want to do gossip here about the John Mulaney split. I did find it fascinating. I wish him, his ex, and his new girlfriend, supposedly, I wish them all the best. I will say that, again, we've talked about a few celebs of this thing now, and I'll go back to last week with Kelly Osbourne and say, for someone to experience relapse, from what we know, and again, I don't know everything, so I'm not prescribing anything here, but she seems to be doing the right things. John, I do worry about someone who is just now 60 days sober, who is now going through a divorce, starting a new relationship, and going back in full swing into work. Those are things that concern me. So, let's get the mail. And speaking of the Kelly Osbourne video from last year, and speaking of the Kelly Osbourne video from last week, our first piece of mail today comes from Instagram. It was about that video, and it comes from It's Me 323. I will tell you that this person is, I would say, probably the most contrarian member of my online community. So just a little perspective there. And she commented, sadly, we don't have the resources she has. And this is in reference to a clip where I was talking about how I really think that Kelly appears to be doing all the right things. And I think that if I had to bet on it, I would feel pretty good that, she's going to be okay. And I wanted to point out this comment because it is absolutely true, and we talked about it in the video, that someone like Kelly Osbourne does have more resources than you and I have. But it is also possible to get sober without the family or the person spending an arm or leg to get sober, and you can get sober affordably. It is possible. Look, this, rehabs cost a ton of money no matter where you go. But I'll start by saying that AA meetings are free, It doesn't cost any money to walk in those. And I know a large number of people who have gotten sober solely due to Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Love and Sex Anonymous, food groups. All of that stuff is free. Anyone can walk in, and millions of people have gotten sober just through that, through not going to outpatient rehab, inpatient rehab, anything like that. I will also say that there is as far as I know, no correlation between the cost of a recovery center and the success rate. Our success rate's not good all around, okay? So it doesn't matter where you go, your chances still suck. That's just the reality. You can feel better about sending someone to a place that's more expensive, or if a person's case is, just a lot more difficult, there's a lot more going on there, then it may behoove someone to spend more money to go. But I'll also say, the place I went to, if you go to the right place, and this is if you do choose to spend the money to go to a recovery center, if you go to the right place, they will fight tooth and nail to make sure you get the most affordable treatment possible. I mean, the place that I went to, and if you have any questions about it, I'm happy to tell you in a direct message, but I remember those people would spend, they would spend half their working hours and beyond on the phone with the insurance companies to help people get covered as much as possible. Now, that's not technically their job. Their job is to be there to counsel and to help and to build a program that's going to help more people get sober. And they would spend hours on the phone battling with insurance companies to make sure that those people got the most affordable care possible. And it is my belief and understanding that good recovery centers with good people working there will do that. So the point is, yes, Kelly Osbourne does have more resources than you and I. That doesn't mean you have to have more resources to make it through. And I'll point out that I think Kelly talked about going to rehab, but she's also talked about, she's getting sober now through meetings. I mean, she's going to a meeting on Zoom across the country in the UK, which those things don't cost any money. They just cost you showing up and wanting to go. And that's the main point, really, is it doesn't matter how much the recovery costs. What matters is that the person going through it wants to get well. That's what matters. But it's me, 323. Thank you so much for commenting, and I'm glad you did that so that I could have a little rebuttal here, so I appreciate it. Next comment, and this one came from the video where I was talking about the sacrifices I've made for my life through work and how that's left me single and lonely. But Meat Sweets Brains Gains commented on that video on Instagram. Absolutely, becoming a doctor cost me my marriage. I wouldn't do it all over again. I'm sad to hear that. Thank you for the comment. We all like to think that when we make a big sacrifice or go through something painful, that when it's over and we're looking back, we'll say, but you know what? I would do it all over again. But that's just not reality. I can think of specifically, I went through a certain season at my job that was harrowing. I would not wish it on my worst enemy. And I think back, and the whole time I was getting through it, I was like, I'm going to make this worth it. I'm going to get through this, and it's going to be worth it at the end. And you know what? In the end, it was worth it. But I'd never do it again. So I had to learn, I had to go through it that time, and it ended up okay in the end. But if I ever see that type of situation coming up for myself again, I'm going to know that I can't go through that again. And so I'm really sorry to hear that, achieving something like that, so great, like becoming a doctor, like the amount of work that goes into something like that and time, blood, sweat, and tears is incredible. And to lose your marriage because of that, I'm really sorry to hear that, because you want it all to be worth it, right? I'm more sorry to hear. I am sorry to hear that it cost you marriage. I'm more sorry to hear that you wouldn't do it all over again. But I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at, is like, we have to go through those experiences to know what we wouldn't do again, right? But I'm very happy that you're a doctor. I'm happy that you don't have a marriage anymore. I'm not happy that you don't have a marriage anymore. But I suppose if there was going to be a silver lining, at least you're a doctor. All right, that's the mail. If you would like to comment, we would love to share it. You can comment right here on the video. You can comment on any of these social media feeds when I post the clips, or you can DM anything that you DM to me, unless you tell me that it's okay to share. That can be between us, so feel free to reach out anytime, and we'll see you next time. Hey family, if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Share it with someone who you think might benefit from watching this, and feel free to comment below. Love.